DJ Lagway, a five-star quarterback from Willis in the class of 2024. Maybe you've heard of hashtag DJ2BU. Who is DJ Lagway, and what are the odds that this elite quarterback joins Dave Aranda at Baylor University? This is Locked On Baylor.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right. Welcome, folks, into Locked On Baylor. I'm Drake Toll today alongside John Garcia Jr., the director of football recruiting at Sports Illustrated. And John, the big commotion this past weekend for Baylor off the field of the spring game was a guy by the name of DJ Lagway. 4-5-star by most accounts. Kid is highly touted. He's been to Alabama, Florida, Arkansas is also in the mix. And it just seems like Baylor has no shot at getting this guy.
Well, he just visited, right? I mean, he was just on campus. I don't think it's too early, especially at the quarterback position, to begin to eliminate some of these schools on that same front. You know, quarterbacks have to work with an accelerated time frame. We saw Austin Novosad get his commitment wrapped up in the class of 2023 relatively quickly. And Lagway is a kid who's going to have a more national reach in his process. So he's been really busy trying to check out these schools to get a first impression. And it's never too early to read into some of these first impressions that he's going to get. And look, this is a national recruit, as you said, arguably the top quarterback in the country for next cycle, huge breakout year in 2021, and a legitimate dual threat. So, I mean, this is a scheme versatile recruit that can fit a more conservative front or the most wide open spread offense that's out there. But it's never too early to read into visits, especially when it's surrounding a spring game or especially when it's in state. You know, this is a Texas kid. And I think that's something that is always a little asterisk when you're talking about top recruits because, you know, Texas kids, Mississippi kids, Georgia kids, certainly. There's certain states where you're like, no matter what, you got to keep an eye on the in-state schools. Ohio is one of them as well. And I consider Texas one of those, especially with the fluctuation that we've seen, right? It's not just about the Longhorns anymore. A&M has certainly made their impact. Baylor's on the up and up, clearly. So I think all those are under consideration. But, yeah, he just visited, so they have to be in it to a certain extent.
John, that's exactly what I wanted. You're saying there's a chance, and there are the pessimists that say not the small Baptist school down in Waco who's making waves in college football now, and he would certainly be one of the top 3 gets of all time in Baylor football history if he were to commit to Baylor. Now, his dad is a Baylor football alum, so obviously that plays into the mix a little bit, but I want to know why. Why would a kid like DJ Lagway pick a Baylor over a big NIL school like Texas A&M or Alabama?
Well, it's probably still early to think about him with the NIL process. But look, quarterbacks are their own thing in almost every single way, even to the point where I'm not sure NIL has as much staying power with the quarterback. Because, look, if you're a starting quarterback at a Power 5 program, like, you're probably going to do okay with NIL. Yeah. I don't care if it's what's the smallest Power 5. I mean, do we go Kansas for football, Purdue? Yeah. You know, it's a smaller school in general that you're still going to be okay with if it comes down to it. But really, it's about opportunity. Again, he's a Texas kid. And when you're the face of a program, it doesn't matter how small that program might appear to be perceptually. But again, this is a Texas kid who understands what Baylor is. And obviously his father plays into that to a degree as well. And I think there's always the possibility of really with recruits that are legacies, you look at it 2 ways. They either totally avoid where the family has all the ties, like Arch Manning is like, no, thank you, Ole Miss, no, thank you, Tennessee, or they go all in the other way. And they're like, you know what? Like, I would love to carry on this. That's why they're called legacies. I would love to carry on the legacy where dad made some kind of impact and try to beat him out, right? I mean, we saw last year that the whole award circuit, like Aiden Hutchinson at the Heisman and all that, it was all about like beating his dad's records and extending that legacy at Michigan, which he obviously did. So there's still that kind of almost like a romantic element of following in somebody's footsteps. So again, I think at quarterback, it has a little bit more oomph. And look, Baylor's one of the programs that we've seen, if you get that generational quarterback, that face of a program where RG3 was more visible than, coach we won't talk about, that means something.
Yeah.
It's happened already. So I think that has some impact as well. How big the reach can absolutely be. So that's got to be appealing in its own right.
Alabama heavy in the mix right now, as we mentioned. Arkansas too. The Alabama quarterback room, as it sits today, has 7 QBs. Now Baylor has 4, and I think that's played into it. We've talked to a couple different people in the last week, football and basketball side. Smart recruits, smart parents are looking at high school coaches too. Roster, depth chart. What are your odds to play looking down the road? I know that's at play here for Baylor and DJ Lagway, but on the flip side, John, if in case there's a Baylor fan that needs to be sold on DJ Lagway that's saying, all right, maybe he wants us, why do we want him? What sets this guy apart as one of the top 1 or 2 quarterbacks in the state of Texas in the class of 24?
Well, as I mentioned, huge breakout year in 2021. If you just go by the numbers, unbelievable touchdown to interception ratio, accounted for more than 20 scores against just 2 interceptions. So there's a little bit of maturity in his game that's on display already. But really, where he breads his butter is when you turn the tape on. I mean, this is an electric quarterback recruit who can do it with a big arm. He can throw off balanced. When he does set his feet, he can push that thing 50, 60 yards down the field with relative ease. But then he's got this other dynamic. When he takes off with the football, it really turns into a dynamic slot receiver or even a running back when he does make a decisive decision and say, hey, I'm going to tuck and run. Big things happen, whether it's your long touchdowns, making guys look silly in space, or just outrunning others. DJ's tape has a little bit of everything. And when you start to put all of that together, it really just makes kind of the perfect modern quarterback, 6'2", 200 pounds right now. So he's already got good size. He's a compact, well-built kid relative to just being a sophomore in high school. But you also know he's probably going to get a little bit taller. Obviously, his dad had some height to him, and he's still just, 15, maybe 16 years old at this stretch. So we know there's a lot of, physicality is a strength, and we know more is on the way, basically. So it's really easy to project out a kid like that, and he's got a higher floor because of that dual threat ability. So it really just catches everybody's attention, even schools that aren't necessarily known to have that running quarterback element. As you mentioned, Alabama, Georgia, some of the schools that are in this mix, Texas A&M, that they're really not used to having that QB run element as much as other schools, but even they're in on Lagway. And I think that's what makes him special and kind of reemphasizes the point of his overall skill set and that projection of what he might become by the time he actually gets to one of these schools.